I caught my wife cheating and thanked her for saving my life. Sounds crazy, right? But let me tell you, the path that led me to that moment was even crazier. It was the moment I realized that my life, as I knew it, was a carefully constructed illusion, and Elena, in her betrayal, had inadvertently set me free. My name is Nathan Vale, and I'm 38 years old. I work as a risk analyst for an international insurance firm. My days are spent predicting catastrophes, calculating probabilities, and helping people avoid the worst-case scenarios. I'm good at it, maybe too good. I've always been analytical, reserved, and loyal to a fault. I avoid drama like it's a storm I can see coming from miles away, and I bury my emotions under layers of logic and routine. It's how I've lived my life, and for a long time, I thought it was the right way. Structure keeps things safe, or so I believed. 16 years ago, I met Elena at a cafe in the city. She was an aspiring novelist back then, full of dreams and passion, her eyes lighting up when she talked about the stories she wanted to write. I was a numbers guy, fascinated by statistics and risks, always looking for patterns in the chaos. We were opposites, but somehow, we clicked. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Over the years, our lives settled into a comfortable routine. I climbed the corporate ladder, crunching data and forecasting disasters, while Elena gave up her writing dreams to support our family. We had a daughter, a house, and all the markers of a successful life. But somewhere along the way, we lost each other. I was there, physically, but my heart was elsewhere, lost in spreadsheets, reports, and the safety of predictability. Elena, though, was starving emotionally. I didn't see it, or maybe I didn't want to. I was too busy analyzing risks for strangers to notice the one growing right in front of me. Our conversations became shorter, more transactional. I'd ask about her day, she'd give me a vague answer, and I'd nod, already thinking about the next deadline. We were living parallel lives, and I didn't even realize how far apart we'd drifted. It started with small things. Elena began dressing differently, more thoughtfully, before heading out to what she called her writing class. She'd leave the house a little earlier than necessary, come back later than expected, her eyes sparkling with a light I hadn't seen in years. At first, I was happy for her. She'd found something that brought her back to life, something I hadn't been able to give her. I told myself it was good she was reconnecting with her creative side. But then, I noticed the way she laughed at her phone, her cheeks flushing with excitement. It was a laugh I recognized, a laugh she used to share with me, back when we were young and everything felt possible. One night, I was working late on a life risk audit for a couple's file. It was routine stuff, assessing their lifestyle, their habits, their likelihood of facing a crisis. But something about it hit me hard. On paper, they had a perfect life, stable jobs, a kid, a mortgage. Yet, the data showed cracks, missed signals, unspoken tensions that could unravel everything. It was like looking into a mirror. That same night, I glanced across the living room and saw Elena texting someone, her face glowing in the dim light. She smiled in a way I hadn't seen in ages, and for the first time, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. I didn't say anything. I just turned back to my laptop and kept working, burying the feeling like I always did. But the truth has a way of bubbling up, no matter how hard you try to push it down. A few weeks later, I found myself staring at my phone, at an app one hadn't opened in months. It was the GPS tracker on Elena's car, something I'd installed years ago when our daughter was learning to drive. I don't know what made me check it that night. Curiosity, maybe, or some nagging instinct I couldn't shake. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew I was looking for answers I wasn't ready to face. As I sat in my car, watching the blinking dot on the screen, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. The dot was moving away from the city, heading toward a place I knew all too well, a lakeside cabin where Elena and I had spent weekends early in our marriage. Memories flashed through my mind, lazy mornings by the water, her reading drafts of her stories aloud while I pretended to listen. It had been years since we'd gone there together. I remember thinking, as I drove through the dark, winding roads, that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she was just meeting a friend, or maybe she needed some time alone. But deep down, I knew better. The signs had been there for months, and I'd ignored them, hiding behind my calculations and my routines. Strangely, I didn't feel angry or betrayed, not yet, anyway. I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. It was as if the analytical part of my brain had taken over, assessing the situation with cold, clinical precision. But underneath that calm exterior, there was something else, a flicker of emotion I couldn't quite pin down. Was it fear? Relief? Curiosity? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had to see it for myself. So, I started the engine and followed the trail, the hum of the car filling the silence. I had no idea what I'd find when I got there, or how I'd react when I did. Part of me didn't want to believe what I suspected, but another part, a part one didn't even recognize, was almost eager to face it. Little did I know, that drive would mark the beginning of something bigger than I could imagine. It wasn't just about Elena or our marriage, it was about me, and the life I'd been sleepwalking through for years. The drive there took me along narrow, unlit roads that twisted through the trees, giving me plenty of time to think about what I might discover. Elena had been different lately, distant in a way that wasn't new but sharper somehow, more deliberate. She'd started putting effort into her appearance again, claiming it was for her writing class, and she'd come home late with a brightness in her face I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. I told myself it could be innocent, that maybe she was just finding herself again, but the excuses felt hollow even as I repeated them in my head. By the time I reached the cabin, parking far enough away to avoid being noticed, I knew I wasn't going to turn back. I approached on foot, sticking to the shadows cast by the trees surrounding the property, and stopped when I saw light spilling out from the cabin's windows. Music drifted through the air, faint but clear, and I positioned myself where I could see inside without being spotted. That's when I saw them, Elena and a man I didn't know, sitting together on the couch. She was leaning into him, her head on his shoulder, and he was talking while she laughed in a way that used to belong to me. I stood there, watching them interact with an ease that made my stomach turn, but instead of the rage I expected, I felt a cold detachment settle over me, like I was studying a scene that didn't involve me at all. Time slipped away as I stayed hidden, taking in every detail of their closeness, the way they spoke without hesitation, the casual touches that spoke of familiarity. Elena eventually stood up, kissed him, and left the cabin, driving off into the night without ever noticing me standing there. I waited until her taillights disappeared before stepping out of the trees and walking toward the deck where the man remained, gazing out at the lake with a drink in his hand. He didn't jump when I appeared, just glanced over at me and said, "You must be Nathan," his tone calm, almost welcoming. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral as I replied, "And you are?" "Logan Chase," he said, holding out a hand I didn't take. He dropped it with a small shrug and sat back down. "I had a feeling you'd show up sooner or later." "You knew about me?" I asked, keeping my voice even despite the way his words churned inside me. He looked at me directly, no trace of guilt in his eyes. "Yeah, Elena told me all about you. Said you were reserved, always in your head, like she was living with someone who wasn't really there." I absorbed that, feeling it sink in without letting it show. "So you thought that gave you permission?" Logan exhaled, scrubbing a hand through his hair. "I'm not saying it was right. I knew she was married, and I went along with it anyway. She was stuck, man. She needed something to pull her out of whatever rut she was in. I thought I could be that for her." "You thought?" I repeated, catching the shift in his words. He stared out at the lake again, his jaw tightening. "Turns out she was playing me too. She's been working on this manuscript, some story about being trapped emotionally. Said it was inspired by both of us. This whole thing, the affair, it was just material for her." I stood there, letting his revelation settle over me, trying to wrap my head around it. "She was going to leave both of us?" "That's what she told me," he said, nodding slowly. "Last week, she said she was done, that she needed to get away from everything, me, you, all of it. We were just pieces of her research." The absurdity of it hit me, Elena turning our lives into some kind of experiment for her writing, but instead of anger, I felt a flicker of something else, something like clarity. She hadn't just deceived me, she'd used him too, and somehow that made it less personal, less about me failing her. I looked at Logan, still sitting there like he was waiting for me to decide what happened next, and asked, "What do we do now?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. Beats me. Guess that's your call. I didn't answer him, just turned and walked back to my car, the night air cool against my skin as I left him behind. Driving home, my thoughts spun in every direction, piecing together the months of distance and the reality of what Elena had done. I should have been breaking down, consumed by hurt or betrayal, but instead, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy for years and hadn't noticed until it was gone. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end of my story, it was the start of something else entirely. I walked into the living room, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a drumbeat I couldn't silence. Elena sat on the couch, her gaze locked on the flickering television screen, though her vacant stare told me she wasn't absorbing a single frame. She glanced up as my shadow crossed the threshold, a ripple of surprise tightening her features before she smoothed them back into that practiced calm she'd mastered over the years. "Nathan, you're home early," she said, her tone flat and guarded, like someone testing the weight of a fragile truce. I stood there, hands shoved deep into my pockets, feeling the air between us thicken with everything unsaid. "I need to talk to you," I replied, forcing my voice to hold steady even as my insides churned with a nauseating blend of fury and dread. She clicked off the TV, the sudden silence amplifying the tension, and looked at me with those wide, expectant eyes that used to pull me in but now just made me ache. "What's wrong?" she asked, though the way her fingers tightened around the remote suggested she already suspected the answer. I sucked in a breath, sharp and ragged, and let the words spill out before I could rethink them. "I know about Logan. I saw you with him at the cabin." Her face drained of color, lips parting as if to protest, but I barreled forward, cutting off any chance for deflection. "Don't deny it. I followed you there. I saw you together." Her eyes flared with something, shock, maybe anger, and she snapped, "You followed me? You were spying on me?" The accusation stung, but I held my ground, refusing to let her turn this around. "I was worried," I said, my voice low and tight, each word deliberate. "You've been acting strange for months, coming home late, dressing differently, always glued to your phone." I had to know what was happening. She shot to her feet, her posture rigid, and fired back, "So you invaded my privacy? That's your solution?" I matched her intensity, stepping closer. "I wouldn't have had to if you'd been honest with me. But you weren't. You were cheating on me with Logan." She flinched at the word, a quick, involuntary twitch, but then her expression hardened into something defiant. "Fine. Yes, I was seeing Logan. But it's not what you think." I almost laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. "Not what I think. I saw you with him, Elena. You were laughing, touching, kissing. What else could it possibly be?" She exhaled heavily and sank back onto the couch, her shoulders slumping as if the fight had already drained out of her. "I was lonely, Nathan. You were never here, even when you were sitting right next to me. You were always buried in your work, your spreadsheets, your endless calculations. I needed someone who noticed me, who heard me, who reminded me I wasn't invisible." Her voice cracked, and I felt it hit me square in the chest. "And Logan did that for you?" I asked, hating how small I sounded. "Yes," she said simply, meeting my gaze. "He did. He's a writer, like I used to be. He understood parts of me you never bothered to look for." I paced the room, unable to stand still, the hardwood creaking under my weight. "I tried, Elena. I really did. But maybe I didn't know how to reach you the way you wanted." She nodded faintly, her eyes glistening. "You didn't. You were always so analytical, so distant. I felt like I was sharing this house with a ghost." The words landed like a punch, and I stopped moving, staring at her. "I loved you," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to control it. "I still love you. But maybe you're right, maybe I got so caught up in keeping everything stable that I let us fall apart." She blinked, tears spilling over, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Nathan. Not for the affair, but for what we turned into. We were both stuck in this charade, pretending it was enough when it hasn't been for years." "So what now?" I asked, my throat tight with a mix of rage and grief. "Do you want to leave? Do you want a divorce?" She wiped her eyes, hesitating. "I don't know. I was planning to leave both of you. I've been writing a book about it, about feeling trapped, about losing myself. It was my way of figuring things out. I froze, disbelief surging through me. You were using us for your book? She shook her head quickly. No, not like that. It wasn't about exploiting you or Logan. It was about me, about clawing my way back to who I am. I clenched my fists, my voice rising. But you were going to walk away from me, from our family, for your writing? She looked desperate now, pleading. I didn't know what else to do. I was suffocating here. I needed to breathe again. I turned away, staring at the framed photo of our daughter on the mantel, her gap-toothed grin from a summer picnic years ago. And what about her? I asked, thinking of the teenager upstairs, probably lost in her headphones, unaware of the wreckage unfolding below. I don't know, Elena said, her voice breaking. Maybe we can co-parent. Maybe we can figure out a way to make it work. I spun back to face her, incredulous. Make it work? After all this? She stood again, stepping toward me. I'm trying to be honest, Nathan. For once, I'm trying to stop lying to you and to myself. I studied her, the woman I'd built a life with, and felt the ground shift beneath me. Well, honesty is a start, I said, my tone icy. But it's not enough to patch up what's shattered. She nodded, tears streaming freely now, and murmured, I know. But maybe it's the beginning of something better, for both of us. I looked into her eyes, searching for the person I'd once known, and felt a hollow ache where certainty used to be. I need time to think, I said at last, turning toward the door. I can't decide anything right now. She didn't stop me, just whispered, take all the time you need. I'll be here. But as I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face, I knew nothing would ever settle back into place, not the way it had been. This collision had cracked us wide open, and whatever came next, I'd have to confront it alone. I sat at my desk, the computer screen's glow washing my face in pale light. The house was dead quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional groan of the floorboards settling. 2 days had passed since I'd confronted Elena about her affair, and I'd been wrestling with a mess of feelings ever since, numbness 1 minute, a rage I could barely choke down the next. I wasn't about to let it swallow me whole, though. Instead, I decided to channel it into something sharp, something that'd make Elena face what she'd done to me. Staring at the blank document on my screen, an idea started forming. Elena had always wanted to be a published author, and now, with her affair apparently sparking her muse, she was closer to that dream than ever. But what if I could turn that dream against her? What if I could take her ambition and use it to tear down everything she'd built? Logan, her lover, had let something slip during our last run-in. She's been working on this manuscript, some story about being trapped emotionally. Said it was inspired by both of us. My jaw tightened as his words replayed in my head. She was spinning our marriage, our pain, into some tale for the world to gawk at. The nerve of it hit me like a brick, and it lit a fire under my plan. It also gave me an edge. If I could get my hands on that manuscript, I could flip it into proof, lay bare her secrets and let everyone see the truth she'd dressed up as fiction. To pull it off, she'd have to trust me, or at least someone she thought could get her where she wanted to go. I figured posing as a literary agent might do the trick, someone who could dangle success in front of her and get her to hand over the goods without a second thought. I set up a fresh email account and picked a name that sounded legit but wouldn't stick in her mind, Alex Turner. Then I started typing, weighing every word to keep it polished and tempting without giving myself away. Email draft asterisk. Dear Elena. Asterisk, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Alex Turner, and I'm a literary agent with Turner Literary Agency. I recently spoke with a colleague who caught your work at a writing workshop. They couldn't stop raving about your talent and insisted I reach out, asterisk. Asterisk, I'm always hunting for new, real voices, and I'd love to hear more about what you're working on. If you're up for it, send me a sample or a synopsis of your manuscript. I think your story could have serious potential, and I'd be thrilled to talk about representing you, asterisk. Looking forward to your reply. Best regards. Alex Turner. I read it over, double-checking for anything that might tip her off, then hit send. Now it was a waiting game. She bit faster than I'd figured. A few hours later, my inbox pinged with her reply full of excitement and gratitude. She'd attached the manuscript, unbound, with a note practically begging for my thoughts. I opened it and dug in. It was our life, barely scrubbed clean characters that were dead ringers for me and Logan. The lead, Emma, was trapped in a stale marriage with a guy who couldn't reach her, until some lively artist swooped in to wake her up. Reading it felt like a gut punch, stirring up disgust and a weird itch to keep going. But I couldn't get sidetracked. I had a job to do. I created another email account, this one nameless, and started typing a message to her boss at the private school where she worked. Logan taught writing classes there part-time, which made this even sweeter. Email draft asterisk. Dear Sir or Madam. Asterisk, I'm writing to flag something serious about two of your staff, Nathan Vale and Logan Chase. I've learned they're involved in an unprofessional relationship, breaking your school's rules and crossing ethical lines, asterisk. Asterisk attached is a manuscript by Ms. Vale that lays out their affair in plain sight. It's all the proof you need. I strongly suggest you look into this to protect your school's name and your students, asterisk. Sincerely, a concerned citizen. I tacked on the manuscript and sent it. A quiet rush hit me as it went through, like I'd just fired a shot and was waiting for the echo. A few days later, Elena came home looking wrecked. Her face was tight, her usual swagger gone. She didn't say a word about it, but I could tell something was eating at her. Then, one night at dinner, the phone rang. We were sitting there, silent as usual, when she answered. I watched her face crumple, tears streaking down as she hung up. She turned to me, voice shaking. I've been fired, she said. They found out about Logan and me. Someone sent them my manuscript. I faked a stunned look. What? How'd that happen? I don't know, she sobbed. But it's done. My job, my reputation, everything's gone. I reached over, grabbing her hand. I'm sorry, Elena. That's awful. She stared at me, eyes digging for something, comfort, maybe, or a crack in my mask. I kept it steady, hiding the low hum of victory buzzing under my skin. It had worked. My plan had landed right where I wanted it. But the wind didn't hit like I thought it would. There was a hollowness instead, like I'd pulled off something big but left a chunk of myself behind. Still, I knew this wasn't over. More was coming, and I'd have to be ready. I sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, the same one where Elena and I had first met over a decade ago. The place hadn't changed much, still cozy, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air, the walls lined with faded photographs of the city from years past, and the hum of quiet conversations filling the space. But everything else had shifted, twisted into something unrecognizable. I glanced at my watch, then at the door, waiting for Elena to arrive. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady rhythm of anticipation and dread. After executing my revenge, getting Elena fired and dragging Logan into the mess, I'd expected satisfaction, maybe even peace. Instead, I felt hollow, the victory ringing empty. That emptiness had driven me here, to this meeting I'd arranged with a single text, "We need to talk." When Elena walked in, she looked different, thinner, more worn, her dark hair pulled back tightly, but there was a clarity in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. She spotted me and made her way over, her steps slow and hesitant, as if unsure of her footing in this new reality. "Nathan," she said softly as she sat down across from me, her voice carrying a weight I couldn't place, "thank you for meeting me." I'd asked her here, but her gratitude threw me off. I nodded, my throat tight with everything I'd been holding back. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, until I broke it. "How are you holding up?" Elena sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, the ceramic clinking faintly against her nails. "It's been tough. Losing my job, dealing with the fallout, it's a lot. But I'm trying to move forward." I studied her, searching for the woman I once knew, the one who'd filled our home with laughter. She was still there, buried beneath the exhaustion, but distant now. "I've been thinking too," I said, leaning back in my chair. "About us, about what went wrong. The revenge, it didn't fix anything. It just left me with more questions. Her eyes met mine, sharp and searching. And what have you concluded? I took a deep breath, the words heavy on my tongue. I was hurt, Elena. Betrayed. But I was also part of it. I buried myself in work, ignored how unhappy you were. I didn't see you slipping away. Elena's expression softened, her shoulders slumping slightly. I should have talked to you. Instead, I let it fester, sought comfort elsewhere. That was my mistake. The admission stung, reopening the wound of her affair with Logan. Why him? I asked, my voice quieter than I'd intended. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. He made me feel seen, Nathan. Like I mattered again. It wasn't love, it was about feeling alive. Her words cut deep, stripping away the anger I'd clung to, leaving only sadness. I'd been absent, too caught up in my own world to notice her fading. I'm sorry, I said, the apology spilling out. I should have been there. Elena reached across the table, her hand covering mine, her touch warm despite everything. We both messed up. But maybe this is our chance to figure out what's next, together or apart. I searched her eyes for hope, for a sign we could rebuild. Do you think we can save this? I asked, the question fragile. She shook her head slowly, her expression a mix of regret and resolve. I don't know. But we need to be honest, whatever we decide. I nodded, her words grounding me. What about our daughter? I asked, shifting to the one thing still binding us. How do we handle this with her? Elena's face tightened with worry. We'll figure it out together. She deserves the truth, but carefully, to protect her. The conversation turned practical, co-parenting schedules, living arrangements, the logistics of untangling our lives. It was painful, each decision a small cut, but necessary. As we talked, a sense of acceptance settled over me, softening my anger and grief. This might be the end of our marriage, but not our story. When we stood to leave, Elena handed me a small package. It's my new book, she said, a faint smile on her lips. I want you to have it. Surprised, I turned the slim volume over in my hands. What's it about? It's about a man who learns to live again after losing everything, she said, her smile brightening. I think you'll relate. I tucked it under my arm, a mix of gratitude and sadness swirling inside me. Thank you, I said, meaning it. As we parted ways, I watched Elena disappear into the crowd outside, the city swallowing her up. Closure settled over me, alongside the stirrings of something new. The classroom had this low hum, a mix of students dropping their backpacks, flipping open laptops, and shuffling notebooks as they got ready for the lecture. I stood up front, messing with the projector until the screen finally lit up, a quiet calm settling over me that's become familiar lately. Teaching ethical decision-making at the community college wasn't something I'd ever pictured back when I was a risk analyst, buried in numbers and corporate deadlines, but now it feels right, like I belong here. That old life, with its cold offices and endless pressure to guess the unguessable, is just a faint memory now, swapped out for this new routine where I actually connect with people. The students mostly listen, or at least they fake it well enough, and that's more than I ever got from boardroom suits. I caught sight of the trees outside, swaying in the morning light, and found myself smiling, something small I've started doing, noticing things I used to let slide. A student up front snapped me out of it, her hand shooting up, eyes bright with a question. Mr. Vale, how do you know if a decision's ethical when it's all gray? Like, what if you think you're doing good, but someone still gets hurt? Her words hit me square, dragging up stuff I've spent months picking apart. I leaned on the desk, arms crossed, thinking how to answer without letting my past bleed into it too much. That's where it gets tricky, I said, keeping my voice steady. Ethics isn't a checklist you can run down. Sometimes you have to measure what's on the line and accept that someone might get burned. Maybe that's what pushes things forward, forces growth that wouldn't happen otherwise. It's not about avoiding the mess, it's about owning it, being honest with yourself about why you're making the call. As I spoke, Elena popped into my head, her affair with Logan Chase slicing through my old world, showing me how empty it had been underneath. It wrecked me at first, no doubt, but it also yanked me out of that dead-end loop I'd called stability, dumping me into something I couldn't tune out. That night, I was on the porch with Mia, my daughter, the sky turning a deep purple as the sun dipped away. She was messing with her phone, scrolling like it was a reflex, but her slouched shoulders said something was off. I gave her a nudge, keeping it casual. "You doing all right over there?" She sighed, long and heavy, and tossed the phone down on the step. "Kind of. School's a lot, and, I don't know, everything with you and Mom still feels strange sometimes." I nodded, letting her words sit there without jumping in too fast. "Yeah, it's been a wild year, hasn't it? We're still figuring it out, but we're getting by." She looked at me, her eyes cutting through the dark like she was testing me. "Are you really okay, Dad? Like, honestly?" I grabbed her hand, gave it a squeeze, feeling how much that question mattered. "I am now. Took time to dig through the mess, but I've learned some things about myself. I'm trying to be someone you can lean on and someone I can stand to be." Mia leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice going quiet. "Good. I like this you better." I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her in. "Me too. And whatever's bugging you, I've got your back. We'll handle it together, okay?" She tilted her head up, a little smile breaking through. "Okay. Thanks, Dad." After Mia went inside to sleep, I grabbed Elena's book from my study, The Man Who Forgot to Live, staring me down from the cover like a challenge. I cracked it open and started reading, sucked into this story about a guy who'd boxed himself into a life so safe it was suffocating, a guy I knew too well. Elena's words cut deep, weaving her own guilt and longing into it, not to jab at me but to wrestle with what we'd both let slip away. I saw myself in there, the analyst who'd tracked everything but what really counted, and I saw her, reaching for something I didn't know how to offer. When I finished, I just sat there, the house silent, realizing she'd given me a way to see my own flaws clear and maybe move past them. We're not married anymore, but her book keeps us tied somehow, a thread that doesn't need us to talk to mean something. Next morning, I hopped on my bike and rode to the college, the cool air hitting my face as the town stirred awake. I've been feeling lighter lately, freer, which doesn't add up when I think about the past year, Elena and Logan, the revenge I pulled by killing her book deal and getting them fired, all that ugliness. It tore me apart, sure, but it also shoved me into something alive, a life where I'm not just drifting. I pedaled past the cafe where Elena and I had our last real talk, agreeing to focus on Mia and let each other go, and instead of the usual ache, I felt steady, okay with it. We've both found our own paths now, and that's enough. The future's not some puzzle I've got to solve anymore, it's just there, open. I locked up my bike at the college, the sound of students filling the halls pulling me in, and I grinned, ready for the day, knowing I'm finally here for it.